But we begin this morning with a book from the Four Courts Press, Periodicals and Journalism in 20th Century Ireland. It's edited by Mark O'Brien and Felix M. Larkin, and it surveys some 14 magazines, journals and weekly newspapers which flourished in Ireland in the 20th century. We've been exploring the archives for traces of some of these same journals, and the first in this short series was the very popular Dublin Opinion, which flourished from the 1920s to the 1960s.
Now, you could call them lunatics, because that's what they were. They had no money, they had no experience. They only had the urge to do this thing, get out a humorous magazine.
Co-founder, co-editor, Charles E. Kelly.
And we just came together by pure accident. First, Arthur Booth and myself, we decided to have a bash at it. And then I brought in Tom Collins, and the three of us then worked together. Arthur died in 1926, 4 years after it started, and Tom and I then carried on the magazine until the end of 1968.
They always sought to see the humorous side of things, but they'd no fixed agenda, no mission statement of what Dublin Opinion ought to be.
We never thought of ourselves, we never took ourselves seriously, we never thought of ourselves as having a mission. You must remember that we came out right almost exactly with the beginning of the Civil War, 3 months before it. And that was a very terrible atmosphere, brother against brother, son against father and all that. And no one would ever have dreamed of being satirical in that time. Any mission or sense of mission we had at that time was really to try and do something for peace, to bring reconciliation. We made fun of the new army, made fun of the new civic army, made fun of the government, fun of the personalities, but never in a hurtful way.
My father edited Dublin Opinion for 47 years.
This is Frank Kelly, son of Charles E. Kelly, founder of Dublin Opinion. And Frank Kelly, perhaps better known to many people as Father Jack in Father Ted.
He must have been a very brave and very mature young man for his age. I think at about the age of 17 he put his life savings into Dublin Opinion with his beloved and wonderful colleague Tom Collins, whom I knew very well. And with Arthur Booth, whom I didn't know. He was the father figure of the triumvirate. I didn't know him. And their sense of humour contributed enormously to a climate of reconciliation. And the reconciliation was a very slow process. And of course, all this dung was still being thrown in the Dáil, to my memory, even up to the late 50s and early 60s.
You asked for a meeting, Mr. Arnold?
Yes, sir. Well, our duty is to set up a department to add 2 and 2.
That should be easy.
Here an example of the sense of humour of Dublin Opinion. The target here is the civil service. A new department is needed, a department dedicated to the challenge of adding up 2 and 2.
One reasonably educated man should be able to do it. Shall we say one clerical officer?
Well, he would do for the actual addition, but we must record that the addition has been made.
Good. Another clerical officer.
Then, of course, in the public interest, we must have somebody to check that the addition has been accurately made and correctly recorded.
That means, shall we say, a minor staff officer?
He would be sufficient, but as there will be a great many 2s and 2s to add and subsequently record, we shall need a records officer to store the addition cards and the record books in which the operations are recorded.
Or shall we say 3 writing assistants and a clerical officer with, say, a minor staff officer?
Well, we've got so far, but we shall need one officer of higher standing to correlate the work of the branches and generally exercise supervision to prevent waste of public time. We'll make it 1 higher executive officer.
And, of course, a messenger.
2 messengers. We have to remember annual leave and unavoidable absences through illness or other cause. The work must go on.
We must take that into account, too, in arriving at the numbers of staff of other grades. For example, the writing assistant and the clerical.
Agreed. What have we got now?
3 writing assistants, 3 clerical officers, 2 minor staff officers, a higher executive officer, and 2 messengers.
Well, let us treat that as a basic minimum. We must provide now for the expansion that will come as the work of the department grows. We must have trained personnel to meet that natural expansion, and we must provide for such exigencies as annual leave and absence owing to illness, accident, or other unavoidable cause.
Supposing we increase the numbers in lower grades?
That would be the most economical procedure. We can call upon them in times of emergency to perform the duties of the grade immediately above them.
Let's see now. To meet natural expansion, annual leave, accidental absences, etc., shall we make it 10 writing assistants? Better make it the round dozen. 8 clerical officers, 3 minor staff officers, 2 higher executive officers and 4 messengers.
Very well. And though I think that as far as natural expansion is concerned, we're cutting it a bit fine. Still, our watchword must be economy.
We set out purely to poke fun, to light on the things they said and did, and make what fun we could about them. And we would, for instance, portray De Valera and Sean T. O'Kelly as a pair of characters, one exaggeratedly small, the other exaggeratedly tall, and a kind of Mutt and Jeff combination. And we commented in cartoon on what they said and did, but not with any party political alignment of any kind. The main thing was to get a laugh, and if the laugh could be joined in by the victim, we felt we had succeeded really well. The politicians' response in the main was that they did laugh. They were rarely, if ever, as far as I knew, annoyed by anything we did. And they never felt we were letting the politicians down as a body.
Frank Kelly believes that in its way, Dublin Opinion helped to ease the bitterness from the Civil War.
But Dublin Opinion had a kind of softening influence on the bitterness of the climate, and it contributed very positively towards Irish political development in that way. The effect and the power of the cartoon can never be underestimated. It's infinitely more powerful than 1,000 words of prose, or perhaps 2,000 words of prose. When Fianna Fáil, for example, wanted to abolish PR and introduce the straight vote, which was a very, very shrewd political move, and not one which I would totally not admire from a political point of view if I were a political tactician. But when they wanted to remove proportional representation and introduce the straight vote, it would have resulted in an almost indefinite tenure of power by Fianna Fáil, who were the strongest party at the time. They were the monolithic, disciplined party with the strongest party whip. And my father drew a cartoon in Dublin Opinion, and the scene was a classroom. And there was a teacher, and he had a line of boys beside him in ever-diminishing heights, down to almost floor level, like the old Fry's cocoa ad, growing up on Fry's, the family of all the different heights. But he had these schoolboys beside him in the class, this teacher, and each boy held an apple in his hand, and the caption read, "Under PR, each boy gets an apple. Under the straight vote, the big boy gets the lot." Now, to my certain knowledge, Sean Lemass was shown that cartoon at the time, and he virtually danced in rage. I don't know whether he actually danced in rage, but certainly figuratively he did when he was shown that cartoon, because it almost single-handedly destroyed Fianna Fáil's campaign to get rid of proportional representation.
Frank Kelly also believes that Dublin Opinion was often misunderstood by the present generation.
There's often a lot of confusion among the kinds of people who review books. When 40 years of Dublin Opinion and 30 years of Dublin Opinion, when these collections of cartoons and prose writing from Dublin Opinion came on the market, they were savaged by certain clever, rather cerebral critics as not having sufficient teeth. But what these people forget is that as a professional satirist, part of the business is remaining in business. You don't lose your audience in one glorious week. You must educate them, you must woo the beggars along and keep them with you and create some sort of cult so that you can keep educating them satirically. And this is what my father and Tom Collins achieved after the death of Arthur Booth for so long. This was their achievement. They had a very, very strong ethical code about satire. They were both very deeply Christian, both very Catholic men, and very much of their time, although they saw a long way ahead. And their ethic was that you never wounded a person personally if you could avoid it. You would only wound insofar as he could be identified with public life. And it went without saying that you'd never probe into somebody's private life. And you would never say that somebody had a wart on his nose if he had a wart on his nose, because it would be entirely gratuitous. And indeed, when my father cartooned people with facial blemishes of any kind, he went very softly around those areas, because he believed that his Christianity demanded of him something constructive on a satirical level in the political life of the country.
As an example of the unlikely response,
Charles E. Kelly again.
where you might expect perhaps a little bitterness in the response, if there were a response at all, this is a good example of the surprise one can get. I had done a cartoon in 1948 when John Costello declared Ireland a republic while he was in Canada. That was followed in 1949, I think, by an act of the British Parliament guaranteeing the position of the North and sort of putting the seal on partition for the time being, you might say, at any rate. But I did a cartoon showing Brookborough sitting by a cradle as a babysitter, knitting, and in the cradle was rolled up the Ireland bill with a tape round it and a soother in its mouth and a baby's face on the top of it, you see. And John Bull was linking Britannia out the door, going out for the evening. And the title of it simply was The Babysitter. It was quite uncomplimentary to Brookborough. I mean, it made very little of him, if you like. It was a pretty true statement of the situation. But the surprise was that shortly after that, I had a letter from Lord Brookborough's secretary asking could he acquire the original of the cartoon, that he'd very much like to have it. So we, as usual in such cases, presented it to him with our compliments, and he had a very nice letter back from her saying that the cartoon would be framed and would hang in his Stormont House, his official residence. We thought that was very amusing, and I sent the correspondence to John Costello, who was Taoiseach, just to give him a little insight into the make-up of Brookborough, which might be useful politically, as you never know. Anyway, it would show him that there was something behind this very orange face that we were used to looking at, which we wouldn't credit with a sense of humour. And John Costello replied to me, he's very grateful to see the correspondence, and he said it convinced him of one thing, that it might be better if the solution of partition were left in the hands of humourists rather than in those of politicians.
Some reminiscences about the Irish humorous journal Dublin Opinion from its first editor Charles E. Kelly and his son Frank Kelly, and this to mark the publication of Periodicals and Journalism in 20th Century Ireland, edited by Mark O'Brien and Felix M. Larkin. It's from the Four Courts Press, and indeed it is Felix M. Larkin who writes the chapter Humour is the Safety Valve of a Nation, Dublin Opinion 1922 to 1968. And a postscript to this item here, also from one of his many contributions to RTE satirical programmes, is Father Jack, also known as Frank Kelly, with a song about Fianna Fáil and the 1970s, from the arms crisis to the succession by Charlie Haughey of the Fianna Fáil leadership when Jack Lynch stood down.
In the year of our Lord 1970, old Mother Ireland had gone to the wall. The men from the north, they were asking for arms, and the men from the south sent them nothing at all. Some said they'd fight to unite the old sod again, some said they wouldn't and turned a blind eye. Some said they thought the whole thing was a cod, and Jack Lynch said he wouldn't stand idly by. 5 long years they spent in government, 5 long years saying nothing at all. 5 long years they spent in government, learning to dance for Fianna Fáil. Bowman stepped out and Blaney stepped in again, Blaney stepped out again, Gibbon stepped in again, Gibbon stepped out, and Charlie stepped in again, learning to dance for Fianna Fáil. Then Jack heard the story of arms being imported, grenades, guns and rifles, bazookas and all. I decided I'd prosecute them and reported a bunch of the lads I'd employed in the dawn. Within 24 hours the whole lot were arrested and into the courtroom came TDs and all. Though a few of their ministers' powers was divested, the court found them guilty of nothing at all. 5 long years they spent in government, 5 long years saying nothing at all. 5 long years they spent in government, learning to dance for Fianna Fáil. Bowman stepped out, Blaney stepped in again, Blaney stepped out again, Gibbon stepped in again, Gibbon stepped out, and Charlie stepped in again, learning to dance for Fianna Fáil. Easy Sheila. When the country returned to a calm that was sinister, Blaney left out, Bowman gone to the wall, and Gibbons held on to his job as a minister. He appeared to have no say at all. Jack Lynch told them all he was tired of being Taoiseach and going for election and trying to win votes. And Desi was cute as he planned his defection, while Charlie and Collie were feeling their oats. 5 long years they spent in government, 5 long years saying nothing at all. 5 long years they spent in government, learning to dance for Fianna Fáil. Jack stepped out, Desi stepped in again, Desi stepped out, and Collie stepped in again, Collie stepped out, and Charlie stepped in again, learning to dance for Fianna Fáil. keep the party going, Sheila. Now Charlie is Taoiseach, the rest it is history. Collie back Jack and was damn nearly gone. What happened Jim Gibbons is surely no mystery, and Desi knew which horse to put his bet on. And so we've a government stronger than ever, the finest that ever held power in the land. One thing to remember, if you were in politics, always be sure to back the right man. 5 long years they spent in government, 5 long years saying nothing at all. 5 long years they spent in government, learning to dance for Fianna Fáil. Jack stepped out, Desi stepped in again, Desi stepped out, and Collie stepped in again, Collie stepped out, and Charlie stepped in again, learning to dance for Fianna Fáil. Charlie, easy now, Charlie. Charlie's the right to make them.
Frank Kelly, and I hope you got all the references there. I think that's from the archives of Get an Earful of This.